The story of Subnautica begins with an ancient alien species known as the Architects. While the origins of the Architects are largely unknown, what they left behind presents a framework for what must have been a rich history. Beginning in their homeworld, in an era that would become known as pre-civilization, the Architects were constrained to their purely biological bodies. However, as their species sought to expand, they evolved beyond the constraints of their corporeal form, able to transfer their consciousness into a wide variety of cybernetic and organic storage mediums. It's possible that this is the origin of their cultural hive mind, their proclivity to put the interest of the collective over the individual. However, it's just as likely that this is a deeply instinctive trait, carried over from their original culture. While this incredible leap in evolution did allow them to remove themselves from the constraints of space-time, the Architects insisted on remaining tethered to the physical universe. To do so without sacrificing the sophistication this advancement afforded them, the Architects adopted cybernetic storage mediums known as vessels. Grown organically or constructed via fabrication facilities, these hollow vessels were created using a wide variety of trace biological sources. While it is unclear whether or not each vessel was the same, it is evident that the Architects insisted on remaining with their original vessel, improving it with technology and modified organic material over their lifespan, only abandoning it when absolutely necessary. Utilizing these vessels, the Architects expanded across multiple galaxies, along the way visiting an untold number of worlds. As was their nature, they sought to understand each world they came across, studying their flora, fauna, and, if applicable, culture and technology. One such world was known by its inhabitants as Earth, where around their 13th century, the Architects collected a sword used in one of their primitive battles. It's during this era of exploration that the Architects would stumble upon something that would change the fate of their species. While embarking on a routine network expansion in the outer worlds, a collection of Architects discovered Kara, an incredibly infectious bacterium that would spell doom for their civilization. Following its initial discovery, the Kara bacterium was put under standard quarantine procedure. However, failure to properly secure the quarantine resulted in the uncontrollable spread of the bacterium. The subsequent pandemic ravaged the core worlds, claiming over 143 billion lives. Devastated by the loss, the Architects quarantined the core worlds and began distributing samples of the bacterium to an untold number of research facilities in hopes that one of them would successfully develop a vaccine. One such facility was on an ecologically diverse ocean world that would become known as Planet 4546b. Upon arriving on Planet 4546b, the Architects established a handful of facilities within two highly diverse ecological hotspots known as the Crater and Sector 0. The facilities within the Crater primarily focused on projects related to Kara research, such as the Disease Research Facility, where Kara was primarily studied, and the Quarantine Enforcement Platform, which they had on standby in the event of an outbreak. Sector 0, meanwhile, held various other structures, such as the Fabricator Base, where Architect vessels were constructed, and the Phase Gate facility, which housed a large phase gate in the event they needed to return to their homeworld. In addition to these, sanctuary sites were placed within each zone, allowing the Architects to abandon their vessels and lay dormant in the event of an outbreak. Lastly was the thermal power facility in the active lava zone of the crater, which powered most, if not all, Architect facilities across the planet. With their infrastructure established, the Architects within the Disease Research Facility began intentionally infecting a wide variety of species with Kara in hopes of finding a natural cure for the bacterium. Of all the specimen they tested, one, a massive Leviathan-class creature known as the Sea Emperor, remained completely unaffected, Further testing proved that this was the result of a digestive enzyme she produced called enzyme 42, which inhibited the effects of Kara in its hosts. Wasting no time, they constructed the primary containment facility, imprisoning the Sea Emperor and its eggs in its central chamber to study them further. After trapping the Sea Emperor, the architects ran a number of tests on the creature, primarily discovering that she was far too old to produce a stable version of enzyme 42, the very thing they would need to develop an effective vaccine. This forced them to turn their attention to her unhatched offspring, which showed no signs of hatching in the foreseeable future. With no way of knowing the Sea Emperor's no doubt complex hatching rituals, an architect by the name of Al-An went against the network's directives by studying the eggs of the Sea Emperor's closest relative, the sea dragon Leviathan. Al-An hoped that by learning how to incubate the sea dragon's eggs, they would in turn learn how to expedite the hatching of the eggs of the Sea Emperor. While well-intentioned, Al-An underestimated the aggression of the sea dragons, resulting in the destruction of the disease research facility. As the facility sank to the ocean floor, 314 of the 315 test subjects were destroyed by the quarantine protocol, leaving a single infected specimen to infect the rest of the planet. In an effort to contain the outbreak, the architects released the self-warping quarantine enforcer units, or warpers, into the ecosystem. Specifically designed to be the perfect killers, the warpers were tasked with killing any infected wildlife to slow the spread of the infection. While the warpers patrolled the ocean, the architects activated the Quarantine Enforcement Platform, a massive structure/energy weapon designed to destroy any spacecraft that approached or departed the planet. Despite the quarantine procedures, Kara quickly decimated the planet's ecosystem. It's theorized that Leviathan specifically struggled immensely during this period, either killed by the virus itself or from the onset lack of a sustainable food source. The latter is presumed to be the fate of the greater Sea Emperor population, which left the remaining captive Sea Emperor, as well as its eggs, as the architect's last hopes of finding a cure. While Kara suffocated life on 4546b, the architects continued to search for a variety of ways to induce the Sea Emperor's egg hatching. Pressed for time and unaware of the egg's exact hatching rituals, they resorted to forcefully removing one of the unhatched Sea Emperors from its egg, resulting in its immediate death. Though the exact timing is unknown, it's around the same time period that a giant terrestrial Kara-infected Leviathan fell through a thick layer of ice in Sector 0. Too weak to make it to the surface, the Leviathan was eventually preserved in ice, where it would remain untouched for another millennia. When it was eventually clear to the architects that they had not only failed to accomplish their goal, but that there was no evidence they could succeed, they cut their losses and retreated into their sanctuaries. One by one, the architects were stored within an unknown number of incredibly complex storage devices called containment cubes. Al-An specifically was stored within the advanced containment cube in Sanctuary 0, where he would remain for the next 1,000 years. With the architects dormant inside their sanctuaries, the only hope for 4546b became the Sea Emperor. Though Enzyme 42 wasn't potent or stable enough to cure its subjects or develop a vaccine, it still remained capable of nullifying the deadly effects of Kara. This, combined with the vast network of pipes that sustained the Sea Emperor with fresh food and water, created a cycle in which the small, shallow water-dwelling fish called peepers would be transported to the Sea Emperor's habitat. Inside, they would be enriched with Enzyme 42 and released back onto the surface, where they would be consumed. Thus, the crater remained the last bastion of life on 4546b, the rest of the planet either barren or decimated by the effects of Kara. Over the next several centuries, life on 4546b remained on the brink of extinction. Likewise, the Sea Emperor barely hung on to her own life, only managing to vastly surpass the estimated lifespan of her species due to her consistent food source, lack of predators, and will to save her children. Suffering a fate similar to that of 4546b, the architects were driven to what is presumed to be extinction at the hands of Kara. or at a minimum, seclusion within their numerous sanctuaries. Surely, the architects assumed that without their guiding hand, life in the universe was fated to fall prey to Kara like they did themselves. Little did they know, upon that primitive world known as Earth, humanity was gearing up for an expansion, unknowingly setting them on a path that destined them to finish what the architects started. Just under a millennia after the architects imprisoned the Sea Emperor, humanity sought to expand their influence beyond Earth. This transition, slow at first, was exponentially accelerated when humanity developed phase gate technology, allowing them to travel faster than the speed of light. Though the specifics are unknown, it's probable that the subsequent expansion to different star systems gave rise to a new type of governing body, one that thrived in the high-risk yet near infinitely profitable environment of space, a hybrid between the governments that ruled Earth and the corporations that dominated beyond. They were dubbed transgovs. Despite the endless amount of space in, well, space, practically all of the transgovs found themselves locked in numerous endless wars. While this transpired, a young defense manufacturer named Altera found incredible success in supplying arms to all sides of the many conflicts. In doing so, they collected a vast colonist workforce, allowing them to transition from a simple manufacturer to one of the most dominant transgovs. Positioned as one of the most influential powers, Altera sought to end the wars before they themselves were pulled into them by threatening to cease trade altogether. Soon enough, the threat proved effective, as this act would become known as a major turning point in the conflicts, bringing about the end of the hostilities and the signing of the Charter, a document that required all 37 complying transgovs to fund an independent military force that was to be overseen by the Trans-System Federation, an overarching governing body that maintained order between the transgovs. This, Altera hoped, would keep their fellow transgovs in line, allowing them to compete as corporations, not military powers. A no doubt deliberate move by Altera, as by ending the war at the time they did, they had not only made themselves out to be the heroes, but also shifted the power balance within Federation space, giving themselves a distinct advantage moving forward. When the wars of the expansion ended, the smaller colony systems on the outskirts of Federation space, such as the Mongolian independent states, were left abandoned, perceived as useless in the eyes of the larger transgovs. Thus, they declared themselves independent, forming their own autonomous transgovs. Left to their own accord, the Mongolian independent states, as well as similar colony transgovs, sought to use their small size and positioning at the edge of chartered space to their advantage by implementing their own infrastructure and mining resources before anyone else could reach it. As this took place, a man named Elliot, the head of the research team aboard a Sol Transgov spacecraft known as Mercury 2, performed scans of a then unexplored Category 3 ocean planet simply named 4546b, discovering that it contained complex infrastructure indicative of an alien civilization. Assuming themselves to be on the verge of a xenological breakthrough, Elliot convinced Captain Diana that it would be worth their time to traverse to the planet's surface. Directly after breaking the planet's atmosphere, the quarantine enforcement platform targeted the Mercury 2, refracting the energy pulse across the planet's atmosphere to keep it from breaking quarantine. Detecting the beam using the Mercury 2's anti-pirate sensors, Captain Diana immediately fired emergency flares, purged the water from the nuclear core, and performed an evasive maneuver. The flares and water confused the platform's targeting system, while the maneuver saved them from being struck, allowing them to safely navigate to the Arctic spires of Sector 0. On the surface, Elliot, alongside 6 researchers, began their search for alien ruins. Meanwhile, Sanctuary 0, running low on power, prompted Al-An, and/or the facility itself, to to emit a distress signal to obtain the assistance of any nearby intelligent life forms. Hundreds of meters from the Mercury 2, Elliot's research team picked up on this very distress signal, which they discovered originated a few hundred meters below the ocean's surface. Eager to explore, they dove into the cold, dark water, where half the team was killed by what is presumed to be a squid shark. A few days later, the crew began showing symptoms of the Corabacterium sickness. Though unaware of what exactly it was, Captain Diana knew that it was a sign they had made a terrible mistake. Made worse, the ice worms began attacking the ship, forcing Captain Diana to perform a risky emergency takeoff maneuver. Leaving the infected crew members behind, the Mercury 2 began its rapid ascent into space, where it was once more targeted by the quarantine enforcement platform. After impact, the ship was broke into several pieces, the majority of which landed in Sector 0, the rest either destroyed on re-entry or upon initial impact. During their descent, a mechanic named Yasmin was pulled into safety by an engineer named Stefanos. Hours later, Yasmin awoke, discovering that Stefanos was still unconscious. Despite her aching body and broken bones, Yasmin was determined to return the favor by saving Stefanos' life. To this day, the fate of Yasmin and Stefanos are unknown, though even if they did manage to survive the sparse yet deadly ecosystem of Sector 0, they likely succumbed to Kara after just 2 short weeks. Shortly before or around the same time of the Mercury 2's crash, a teenage girl named Marguerite Maida left her home of the Mongolian states to begin working as a mercenary. After jumping from one mercenary job to another, she did multiple tours with the Mongolian Defense Force and later the Trans-System Federation. During her time with the Trans-System Federation, Marguerite rose up the ranks, eventually heading an intel and a reconnaissance mission. While the specific details of the mission are unclear, what she found prompted her to eliminate the entire local security apparatus over the course of 3 days. While none of the locals were willing to share specifics, they repeatedly thanked God's hand for saving them. Directly afterward, Marguerite was dishonorably discharged, instilling within her a deep-seated hatred and distrust for any and all transgovs. Forced to return to her work as a mercenary, she was eventually hired by Paul Torgal, the head of the Torgal Corporation. Being a legendary mercenary and decorated soldier, Marguerite was hired to escort Paul's ship, the Degasi, to the edge of Federation space, where Bart Torgal, Paul's 19-year-old son, was to lead a mining operation. Little did she know that during their travels, Paul would insist they check out a beautiful ocean planet called 4546b. After crash landing in the crater, the 3 survivors of the Degasi, Marguerite, Paul, and Bart, spent the first few days adrift in an escape pod before finally washing ashore on a remote floating island. With limited supplies and the impossibility of rescue obvious, they did their best to make the island home. By salvaging what they could from the Degasi's wreckage, the crew fabricated shelters, planted what little food they could find, and began studying the planet's alien ecosystem. Over the coming weeks, Marguerite, observing the harsh land and violent storms that hammered the island, concluded that they needed to move to the ocean if they were to survive long term. Soon enough, she discovered the Jelly Shroom Cave, a promising and relatively safe location not too far from the island. 6 weeks after the crash, a violent storm swept across the island, wiping out what little progress they had made since their arrival. Their grow beds flooded and shelters half buried, Marguerite insisted on relocating to the cave. Paul resisted at first, arguing that land was the only place they could maintain long-term comfort. But as resources got scarce and their comfort was slowly stripped from them, the move soon became the obvious choice. While their habitat within the Jelly Shroom Cave was cramped and stifling, the mineral-rich environment and abundance of fish made it ideal for survival. With nothing else to do, Bart, driven by his curiosity, spent most of his time studying the cave's delicate ecosystem, uncovering practical solutions to their endless problems. Marguerite, ever the pragmatist, took interest in Bart's unique skill set. Unlike his father, Bart was forward-thinking, resourceful, and open-minded, all things that she could respect. As such, the two quickly found themselves working in symbiosis. Marguerite utilizing Bart's keen observations to make her own work more efficient, which in turn gave Bart even more of a reason to continue his studies. Over the next few weeks, as their base within the cave began to deteriorate, Bart picked up signs of alien ruins within the deep Grand Reef. Marguerite, hoping to find answers as to why they were shot down, once more proposed they relocate their base. Similar to before, Paul refused to leave. Unwilling to tolerate Paul's lack of foresight, Marguerite planned to make the move regardless after fabricating a sea moth, forcing Paul to bend to her will. The Grand Reef base was their most ambitious one yet. With a functional aquarium for Bart's studies and a reinforced exterior, surely they assumed that this would be where they began to thrive. And for a time, it was. However, their situation took a grim turn when Bart realized they were all sick. Not with some ordinary illness, but something much worse. A bacterium that had infected the entire planet. To eliminate the problem before it could do the same to them, Marguerite began supplying Bart with various creatures, hoping they could uncover how the fauna of the crater resisted the bacterium. Lacking a clear answer, Marguerite, growing impatient, went looking for a fight, eventually returning home with the body of a wounded Reaper Leviathan. After showcasing it to her fellow castaways, Marguerite was confronted by Paul, who called her behavior reckless. The argument that followed prompted Bart to exit the habitat, startling a nearby Reaper Leviathan, which ruptured the sea base. In the ensuing chaos, Bart managed to escape to the safe shallows, while Paul was faced by the Reaper. Marguerite, unwilling to let Paul die despite their numerous disagreements, drove a jagged metal shard into the creature's neck before she was pulled into the abyss. Left stranded in the Grand Reef, Paul followed a light source that emanated from the ocean depths, where he was likely killed by a crab squid. 500 meters below sea level, Marguerite clung to the thrashing Reaper, one hand wrapped around the shard, the other on its scales. The Leviathan continued to spiral blindly, dragging both of them toward the crater's edge. With only 4 minutes of air left, Marguerite used everything she could to finally kill the Reaper. When she finally broke the surface, she found herself stranded in the void. No land in sight, she knew exhaustion would claim her long before she found safety. Hours later, Marguerite's patience was rewarded when the body of the Reaper finally ascended to the surface. Using her knife, she climbed atop the Leviathan and assessed her situation. Though desperate, she found the Reaper had all she needed. Its thick flesh provided warmth during the cold nights. Its fat, once burned, could keep a fire alive long enough to boil water and even cook meat. However, as days bled into weeks, Marguerite was eventually forced to face her demise as the Reaper's flesh began to first rot, then freeze, as she drifted into Sector 0. Soon enough, the creature began losing buoyancy, turning what had once been her only life raft into a tomb that anchored her to her inevitable death. Yet, just as her situation seemed too dire to survive, she saw in the distance a flock of panglings. Knowing where there were birds, there was also land, she kept watch for distant, unmoving clouds. Hours later, she laid eyes on what could only be landmass. Using her last reserves of strength, she swam for the land. When she finally collapsed onto the frozen shore, she promised herself that one day, she would return for the Reaper's skull. Back in the crater, Bart managed to construct a habitat in the safe shallows where he continued his research. While he did so, the Sea Emperor attempted to reach out to Bart telepathically. Unable to trust his own mind, Bart dismissed these as visions, hallucinations brought on by the infection. When it was eventually clear that he would not find a solution to his problem, Bart returned to the floating island. It was there, at the apex of the island, that Bart came to peace with his end. After months on this planet, he finally understood that it was not their destiny to conquer the world or cure the bacterium. No, their fate was to become a part of the planet, a footnote in a much larger story than their own. His only hope that those who eventually uncovered their story would learn from their mistakes, so they could finally accomplish what he could not. Just under a decade after the crash of the Degasi, Altera, seeking to expand their influence, constructed a cutting-edge, long-range capital-class ship called the Aurora. Consisting of a command crew of 23, support crew of 40, 85 engineers, and 9 lucky passengers, the Aurora was designed for both utility and luxury throughout its multi-year journey across uncharted space. After its construction, the Aurora traveled from a space dock on the edge of Altera space, planning to make hundreds of consecutive phase gate jumps through 9 different Transgov authorities, arriving on the far side of the Eridani arm in just 3 short months. From there, the command crew planned to pilot the ship beyond the final phase gate, arriving in the next star system approximately 18 months later. There, the elite team of engineers would have begun a 6-month-long, multi-trillion credit construction project to build the new phase gate. If successful, Altera would have outmaneuvered a cabal of Mongolian corporations operating a range of outposts and mines in the region. In addition to their goal of constructing a new phase gate, the Aurora had a secret auxiliary mission to perform a gravitational slingshot maneuver around planet 4546b to scan for survivors of the Degasi. Though rescue was incredibly unlikely, Altera agreed to help the Mongolian states, as in the territory of deep space, the Aurora would need to rely on the Mongolian states for fuel and other crude resources. To this end, the Aurora was equipped with a cutting-edge scanner suite, as well as an unusual collection of aquatic and all-terrain vehicles, such as the Seamoth submersible, Cyclops submarine, prawn suit, and other various accessories that might help the crew of the Degasi if they managed to pick up a signal. However, as is well known, this would never come to fruition. Just months into their journey, when it was finally time to perform the slingshot maneuver around 4546b, the Aurora crossed the quarantine set by the architects, prompting the quarantine enforcement platform to ground the ship. Just after the platform fired the pulse, the Aurora's advanced scanners detected a high-velocity energy pulse on trajectory to hit the ship. As the beam made its way toward the Aurora, Captain Hollister, following emergency procedure, sent the planet's environmental data to Altera HQ, hoping they would provide a rescue solution. 6 minutes later, the energy pulse impacted the starboard side of the ship, compromising half of the ship's escape pods, as well as outgoing communications. Captain Hollister immediately initiated an emergency evacuation and transferred manual controls to himself to try and land the ship in one piece. Following the evacuation procedure, all surviving life pods, those being 1 through 25, were launched from the Aurora. Of these 25, only 9 would survive long enough to transmit distress signals, the others either destroyed by debris, pulverized on impact, or lost to the ecological dead zone surrounding the crater. As the life pods fell from the sky, Captain Hollister contacted Second Officer Keen of Life Pod 19. In his final message, he ordered Keen to assume command of his crew, and using the attached coordinates, rendezvous with the survivors at a nearby landmass. Meanwhile, aboard Life Pod 5, a non-essential systems maintenance chief named Riley Robinson witnessed as the quarantine enforcement platform fired another pulse at the Aurora. The resulting shockwave ripped a panel off the wall of his life pod, knocking him out cold as the Aurora plummeted to its final resting spot in Crater's Edge. As soon as the Aurora made contact with the planet's surface, the dark matter ion drive's thick metal shields were compromised, leaking radiation in the immediate vicinity of the ship and effectively turning the Aurora into a ticking time bomb. About the same time, Mongolian emissary Jockey Kassar of LifePod 13 was killed on impact with the planet's surface. Their last recorded message was a prayer. Minutes later, the survivors of LifePod 2, Chief Technical Officer Yu and an engineer named Berkeley began taking on water as their pod sank to the bottom of the blood kelp biome. Using their combined technical skills and their pod's oxygen system, the two of them constructed a bilge pump to stop the flooding. Left with only 30 minutes of oxygen and 500 meters below the surface, they decided to use their pod's remaining power to transmit a pre-recorded distress signal. Around the same time, Second Officer Keene, following Hollister's orders, assumed command of the remaining survivors and sent out a distress signal containing coordinates for a nearby floating island. It's assumed by many that before running out of oxygen, Yu and Berkeley received Keene's orders, prompting the two of them to travel to the island. While Yu managed to make it, all evidence suggests that Berkeley was killed during the trip. On the island, Keene regrouped with Yu, who wanted to board the Aurora to send out a long-range distress signal. Keene, on the other hand, resolved to follow Captain Hollister's orders and remain on the island. Ignoring the chain of command, Yu insisted she was going to the Aurora with or without Keene's help, forcing Keene to follow after her. Meanwhile, aboard LifePod 3, two unidentified crew members attempted to rig a sea glide with an extra battery to double its speed. Cause of death unknown. LifePod 4 landed in Crater's Edge, where a Reaper Leviathan attempted to swallow it. Failing to do so, the crew fabricated a creature decoy to distract the Reaper long enough to make it to the Aurora. Cause of death unknown. Stranded in the grassy plateau, the crew of LifePod 6, including the head of human resources and another unnamed passenger, were threatened by the Aurora's radiation leak. Hoping to construct radiation suits to reach the rendezvous, the head of HR scavenged for lithium. When they returned, they found the passenger lighting a flare, causing their LifePod's fuel line to erupt. The crew of LifePod 7, submerged 200 meters below the surface, were left hopeless without a functional fabricator. Cause of death unknown. LifePod 12 was home to Medical Officer Danby, who, soon after impact, contracted the Kara bacterium. Ironically, his final message was a confession that he had cheated his way through medical school and knew nothing about treating an infection. Not that that information would have helped him. LifePod 17 was home to a chef named Ozzy and at least one other unnamed crew member, who shortly after impact were likely ambushed by crab snakes from the nearby jelly shroom cave. 2 hours later, Keene made a final transmission in which he noted that he and Yu were intercepted by a Leviathan on their way to the Aurora. Left with no hopes of survival, he stated that both of them should be considered lost at sea. Just hours after the crash of the Aurora, a news outlet called The Independent published an article about the lack of communication from the Aurora, seeing as they missed multiple routine check-ins. After reaching out for comment, a spokesperson from Altera claimed that this lack of communication was not all that abnormal, and that they had no reason to assume anything had gone wrong. Despite this, rumors continued to circulate about the Aurora's state until a small trade ship on the edge of the system, called the Sunbeam, picked up an SOS from the Aurora, confirming what many assumed was a devastating crash. While the reason behind the Aurora's crash and the state of the ship as a whole was unknown to the public, the fact that it landed on a relatively hospitable planet raised hopes that the rescue attempts would be successful. In addition to this, Altera began looking into alternative rescue solutions, including an idea to transmit blueprints for a purpose-built rocket, which, utilizing the data the ship's scanners had provided them, could be constructed using materials salvaged from the Aurora and the planet itself. A few hours later, and about 8 hours after the Aurora's crash, Captain Hollister's quarters received a rescue solution from Altera HQ in the form of blueprints for the Neptune escape rocket. Around the same time, and just before the Aurora lost communication altogether, the highly advanced onboard scanners searched for signs of life, discovering a single survivor in the safe shallows. Three hours after the crash of the Aurora, Riley Robinson awoke to find his LifePod in the midst of an electrical fire. After putting it out, he booted up his PDA and left the LifePod to assess his situation. Hundreds of meters from any landmass, Riley retreated to his LifePod. Equipped with standard provisions as well as amenities such as a fabricator and short-range radio, Riley set his sights on a single purpose: survival. Over the next few days, Riley scavenged for resources, constructing necessary equipment such as the repair tool, which he used to repair the life pod, as well as other tools like the scanner and sea glide, all the while receiving distress signals from the various life pods. Just as Riley began to fall into routine, however, the drive core within the Aurora detonated, causing a chain reaction that resulted in the ship's reactor reaching a supercritical state. Following the explosion, the rupture of the reactor released a deadly amount of radiation into the surrounding environment. After equipping himself with a radiation suit, Riley continued his quest for survival, eventually crafting more advanced equipment such as the Seamoth submersible and venturing further from the safe shallows. Around the same period, Avery Quinn, the captain of the Sunbeam, attempted to contact the Aurora to no avail. Investigating further, he conducted a scan of the planet, discovering the Aurora's massive debris field orbiting the planet. Unclear as to what caused this devastation or how many survivors there were, Captain Quinn sent a message to any receiving radios on 4546B to inform them that he was on his way to rescue them. As the Sunbeam made its way toward the planet, Riley eventually stumbled into the quarantine enforcement platform. Using a nearby purple tablet, he ventured inside the structure, learning that the planet was under a strict quarantine and that he himself had been infected. Soon afterward, the Sea Emperor, sensing something different about this strange life form, contacted Riley.
What are you?
Days later, Avery Quinn directed Riley to his desired landing spot on Mountain Island. Just over a week after initial contact, the Sunbeam began its descent on 4546B, where the quarantine enforcement platform promptly destroyed it, alongside Riley's hopes of rescue. With the prospect of rescue gone, Riley was forced to travel to the Aurora to repair the radiation leak before it caused irreparable damage to the surrounding environment. While doing so, he found the blueprints for the Neptune rocket. However, the blueprints remained useless until he found a way to disable the quarantine. Hoping to find a solution in one of the various alien structures, he continued to explore the crater, eventually stumbling upon the disease research facility in the Lost River. Inside, he uncovered evidence that suggested the precursor race who once dominated this planet had the same goal as him. While daunting, Riley set his sights on doing what this advanced civilization could not, and cure the planet of the Kara bacterium. Over the coming days, or possibly even weeks, Riley mastered the art of survival. What once was a man who was terrified to leave his life pod became an explorer, who ventured into the depths to recover lost technology, construct bases, and uncover the mysteries of those who had succumbed to the planet. With enough time, Riley ventured into the primary containment facility where he came face to face with the Sea Emperor. Because he could actually communicate with her, the Sea Emperor explained that if Riley was there to help, she would freely give what the architects attempted to take. With that, Riley was entrusted with the Sea Emperor hatching enzymes. Using the warp gate inside the containment room, Riley ventured back to the surface, where he collected the necessary ingredients to craft the enzyme. Upon returning to the eggs, he presented them with the enzyme, allowing them to hatch into healthy young Sea Emperors, who, unlike their guardian, produced a stable and concentrated form of Enzyme 42. Using this to cure himself, Riley ventured to the quarantine enforcement platform to disable the quarantine protocol. Meanwhile, the freedom of her children prompted the Sea Emperor to finally let go of her own life. Once the quarantine was lifted, Riley drew on his vast knowledge of the planet's resources to finally construct the Neptune rocket. Without hesitation, he climbed into the cockpit, finished pre-launch procedures, and hit the launch button. As the ship ascended into the sky, Riley's feeling of accomplishment was replaced with an overwhelming fear of the unknown. For weeks, survival had been his sole purpose. But at this point, as 4546B shrank behind him, he had no idea what was left for him beyond this world he had made his home.
What is a wave without the ocean? A beginning without an end. They are different, but they go together. Now you go among the stars, and I fall among the sand. We are different, but we go together.
Months after the crash of the Aurora, the public were still in the dark about the fate of both the Aurora and the Sunbeam. However, circulating rumors about a strange energy signature that was detected around the same time the Aurora went dark led many to assume the worst. Adding fuel to the fire, Altera refused to comment on the situation, fearing a hit to the record-breaking stock price. Over the same period, the Sea Emperors and subsequently Enzyme 42 spread across 4546b. As Kara's grip on the planet loosened, ecosystems around the planet began to flourish once more. It was at that point that Altera, realizing the potential of the alien ruins left on the planet, installed a satellite in orbit of 4546b to scan for signs of Architect activity. With time, their search honed in on a probable Architect sanctuary in the frigid yet promising environment of Sector 0. After setting their sights on Sector 0, Altera established a handful of research facilities, including Outpost 0, the Xenological Research Lab, Delta Station, the Operations and Communication Center, Phi Robotics, used for research and development, Kappa Mining Site for resource harvesting, and finally Omega Lab, the sector's primary biolab. Though each team specialized in separate fields, the ultimate goal of the project was to study the Architect ruins within Sector 0 to find a way to make contact with the Architects. While some, like Lillian Bench, a xenobiologist of Outpost 0, had great interest in this goal and saw the potential to eventually fulfill it, many others found their lack of immediate progress as evidence of the impossibility of their goal. Likewise, Altera, lacking immediate and tangible results, shifted their focus to the general research of Architect technology. Despite Altera's shift in focus, Lillian remained focused on the original goal of contacting the Architects. Soon enough, her dedication was vindicated when she witnessed multiple instances of technological interference with her equipment. Despite the lack of evidence, she was hopeful that this was the Architects' first attempt to contact them. Around the same period, a mechanical engineer named Sam Ayu developed a robotics project named the Mechanical Avian Amphibian. Regardless of whether or not she pitched this idea to them, or if they came to her, Altera saw promise in this project, and promptly offered Sam a job. Hoping it would allow her to improve and test her project in quote real-world stress conditions, Sam accepted the position despite her reluctance to assist Altera. After joining Altera, Sam was transferred to Sector 0, where she worked under Zeta Landon within the Phi Robotics Center. While at Phi, Sam took inspiration from the Penglings, leading her to update the design and name of the Mechanical Avian Amphibian to the Spy Pangling. It's likely that around the same time period, Marguerite Maida would repeatedly sabotage sea trucks belonging to Fred, the general maintenance worker at Delta Station. When Fred told Sam of this problem, Sam used her spy panglings to track down and eventually confront Marguerite, seemingly coming to an agreement to leave each other alone. Sometime later, while traveling to her mandatory evaluation with Fred, both Lillian and Fred unmistakably heard Al-An's distress signal in the form of an SOS in Morse code. Researching further, Lillian discovered that the signal originated a few hundred meters beneath the surface, which led her to believe its source was an Architect sanctuary. Directly after Lillian and Fred picked up on the distress signal, Al-An, concerned that Altera's interest in the primary warp gate would spell doom for his homeworld, halted his distress signal before he could be found. Soon enough, Lillian contacted Zeta Landon about the distress signal. However, seeing as she could not replicate what she had found, Zeta remained unconvinced. Determined to prove that she was correct, Lillian dismissed the dismissal and continued to search for the signal's source. After multiple failed attempts at locating the Architect Sanctuary and repeatedly acting in opposition to her superior's orders, Lillian finally gained the attention of Altera, who relegated Outpost Zero, and subsequently Lillian herself, to a simple research and maintenance facility. As such, Lillian was given the relatively meaningless task of studying the flora and fauna of Sector Zero, as well as maintaining the outpost itself. Secluded from the rest of the team, Lillian still remained dedicated to continuing her research, albeit in a much less vocal manner. Around the same period, Sam sent a message to her sister Robin, informing her of her spy pangolin development and asking her to look after her cat. Afterwards, she expressed concerns that Robin's employer, XenoWorks, a small research startup, was going through some financial troubles, foreshadowing Altera's eventual investment and practical acquisition of XenoWorks. Sometime later, while exploring the glacier around Phi Robotics, Fred stumbled into the cave containing the frozen Leviathan. When he reported it to his superiors, they quickly assigned Ivan Parvin, the security specialist, to secure the site, allowing Omega Lab to study the Leviathan further. After taking samples, Danielle Valenti, the head of biochemistry at Omega Lab, concluded the Leviathan was likely infected with an ancient variant of Kara. Inside Omega Lab, Danielle studied the bacterium further, confirming that the sample was indeed ancient, as well as far less transmissible than the modern variant of Kara. Further studies revealed that under certain conditions, they could stimulate rapid multiplication of cells, resulting in the creation of several different mutations, some of which had incredible potential in a variety of fields. However, this same potential meant it could also mutate to resist the effects of Enzyme 42, resulting in yet another deadly outbreak. Despite the risk, Altera decided to go all in on Kara research, hoping it would result in the development of state-of-the-art medicine and biological weaponry. Thus, Omega Lab became the dark heart of Sector Zero, tasked with studying this ancient variant of Kara in absolute secrecy. Sometime later, Fred told Sam about the frozen Leviathan as well as Altera's shady reaction to it. Curious as to why it was sealed off, Sam planned to infiltrate the cave to see the creature for herself. Using a spy pangolin, Sam infiltrated the excavation site, discovering the frozen creature was covered in what could only be the Kara bacterium. She immediately reported this to her superior, Zeta, who was more concerned that it would distract Sam from hitting her deadline for the spy pangolin project. However, to help Sam concentrate, Zeta stated that she would take care of the Kara containment, stating safety as her main priority. Though she was assured nothing was amiss, Sam once more messaged Robin, this time noting the shady things going on with Altera and the frozen Leviathan. Brightening the mood, she then sarcastically welcomed Robin to the Altera family, seeing as XenoWorks was under Altera's influence. 1 week after confronting Zeta, Sam, concerned about Zeta's lack of a response, told Danielle that she felt she was being ignored. To ease Sam's mind, Danielle simply told Sam that they were researching Kara. Eventually, this was proven to be a blatant lie when, while talking to Vin, a junior biologist inside of Omega Lab, Sam discovered that they were not just researching Kara, but actively mutating it. Soon enough, Sam gathered her fellow scientists at their weekly game of Alien Intruder, proposing that they band together to stop Altera from continuing to mutate Kara. Some, like Vin or Ivan, who were more involved with the project, were uncomfortable with this proposal, while others like Fred were more inclined to hear Sam out. While the exact reasons are unclear, this insubordinate proposal and the completion of the spy pangolin project resulted in the shutdown of Phi Robotics and Sam getting transferred to Outpost Zero. No longer needing to keep the purpose of the research a secret, Altera put Sector Zero's full attention to Kara research. Finding this development incredibly dangerous, Sam vented her frustrations to Robin, telling her that she was right all along and that Altera were indeed the shady company Robin always portrayed them as. While at Outpost Zero alongside Lillian, Sam began working on an Enzyme 42 based antidote for Kara. When Lillian learned about it, she decided to look the other way, as both of them felt Altera's research was unethical and irresponsible. Eventually, Sam successfully synthesized the antibacterial antidote, stashing it in a spy pangling accessible cave southeast of the frozen Leviathan, planning to use it to rid the Leviathan of the infection. Soon after, Sam went to talk to Marguerite about her plan to cure the Leviathan. While Sam knew what she was doing was right, she remained worried about the repercussions. Whether or not Sam wanted to be talked in or out of it, Marguerite was adamant that Sam was right. In fact, she insisted that they went one step further in destroying both Omega Lab and sealing off the excavation site using remote explosives. Claiming Omega Lab for herself, Marguerite used a sea truck modified with a battering implement to breach Omega Lab, then destroy it using a remote explosive, vaporizing the Kara samples in the process. Meanwhile, Sam traveled to the excavation site where she was caught by Parvin. Unaware of what Sam was about to do, Parvin slowly moved toward her. Just as Sam pleaded for him to back away, she slipped from her elevated position, causing the explosive to detonate, killing both her and Parvin in the ensuing cave-in. Following the accident, Alexis Riedel, an investigator for Altera, did a full investigation into the sabotage at Omega Lab and the deaths of Sam and Parvin. However, the results were found to be inconclusive. Yet, Altera's official stance was that the death of Sam was due to her own negligence, confirmed when they sent Robin a message informing her of Sam's death. To make matters worse, Altera forced Robin to shoulder the cost of Sam's damages and crushing legal fees, fueling her rage even further. With Omega Lab destroyed and the frozen Leviathan far too costly to access, the entirety of Sector 0 was evacuated, leaving the bases to be buried alongside Altera's unethical research. Meanwhile, Lillian, unable to forgive Altera for their shady dealings in Sector 0, eventually sent Robin a message about how Sam's death was not due to her own negligence, reinforcing Robin's desire to explore Sector 0 for herself, to once and for all discover the truth behind her sister's death. Using a Xenoworks ship, Robin traveled to 4546b, where a meteor storm provided cover during her descent into Sector 0. After a not-so-gentle landing, she made her way to the detached drop pod. After gathering some supplies, she followed Lillian's lead in traveling to Delta Station. There, she was confronted by Marguerite, who, assuming she was with Altera, warned her to stay away from her territory. Around the same time, Sanctuary 0 fell below the critical power threshold, forcing Al-An to transmit a final series of distress calls. While gathering more supplies in the Twisty Bridges biome, Robin picked up this very distress call. Curious as to what caused it, she followed the transmission to its approximate source, eventually stumbling upon Sanctuary 0. Inside the sanctuary, Al-An, hoping to escape the confines of his containment cube before the facility lost power, asked Robin to present a storage medium in which he could upload his consciousness. As she approached the sanctuary's central terminal, Robin presented Al-An with her PDA. However, Al-An, unable to distinguish between cybernetic and organic data storage, misunderstood this gesture as an invitation to transfer his consciousness into Robin's mind. After waking up, Robin confronted Al-An about the transfer before the facility lost power. With time, Al-An would inform her that without a proper vessel, he would remain confined to her mind. While at first, Robin would find this arrangement to be less than ideal, she would eventually find comfort in their similarities and fascination with each other's differences. As Robin searched Sector 0 for answers behind Sam's death, as well as Architect ruins, she eventually found Marguerite's base in the Lilypad Crevice biome. Inside, Marguerite told her that if she truly wasn't with Altera and wanted information about Sam, she would have to do them both a favor and disable Altera's satellite using a test override module. After scavenging the ruins of the Mercury 2, Robin found all the parts she needed for the test override module, which she used to disable Altera's satellite. Immediately afterward, Marguerite told Robin to meet her at her greenhouse, northeast of Delta Station. At the greenhouse, Marguerite thanked Robin for disabling the satellite and directed her to listen to a PDA that gave her further insight into Sam's story. Hoping to learn more about Sam, Robin continued to explore Sector 0, eventually uncovering all the Altera facilities, including but not limited to Outpost 0, Phi Robotics, and Phi Excavation Site. Using all available evidence, Robin pieced together Sam's story, learning that she had died trying to stop Altera from researching something they couldn't control. With that, Robin finally finished what Sam started by collecting the antidote using a spy pangolin and curing the frozen Leviathan, ensuring Altera would never again be able to get their hands on Kara. With Altera off her back and the truth behind Sam's death uncovered, Robin could finally help Al-An fabricate a new body. Using the knowledge Al-An had collected from various Architect artifacts around Sector 0, Robin was guided to 3 Architect components, including a skeleton, skin tissue, and organs. With the major components scanned, Robin traversed to the Fabricator base within the Fabricator cave. Using the necessary resources, Robin fabricated each of the major components into an empty vessel, which Al-An was then transferred to. Within his fresh corporeal form, Al-An, still devastated by his actions at the disease research facility over 1,000 years prior, sought to redeem himself by reuniting with his fellow architects using the Phasegate facility. After sharing this information with Robin, Al-An invited her to assist him in accomplishing this goal. At the Phasegate facility, Al-An made the necessary preparations for his return home. When Robin eventually arrived, he gave her the final opportunity to change her mind. However, Robin, satisfied with her search for truth, assured Al-An that nothing was left for her beyond what she had learned in Sector 0. With that, Robin joined Al-An in making the final preparations for the Phasegate. Using a pair of Architect arms, Robin repaired the energy masts around the facility, which Al-An then converted into a ship. When everything was complete, Robin joined Al-An aboard the ship. As they plunged through the depths of space, Robin asked her new friend what he was expecting to find in his home world. Though he was not presented evidence of his species' survival, Al-An followed Robin's lead in setting aside his fear, allowing hope to guide his actions, knowing that in the end, whatever they faced, they would face it together. I'm gonna start this outro by saying if I sound a little bit nasally, it's because I'm a tad bit sick. But as of me recording this, the video comes out in a few days, so I can't really delay this any longer. But aside from that, I wanted to first thank you for watching the video, and if you really liked it, consider supporting the channel by watching the other timelines, becoming a channel member, or visiting OverusedBruh.store, where you can find these new high-quality Subnautica posters designed by One Aim Studios, who you might know from TikTok and Instagram for his Subnautica artwork. I also want to thank channel members Ian, Ashton, Solar, and Hunter, who are all longtime members, as well as Still Coconuts, CSC Dog, Billy's Quirky Music, Stefanzar Auto, and the 10 new members who got free channel membership for tuning into this video's live premiere. As always, for all channel members, there's going to be a new members only video about the most recent timeline, so I'm going to take you through some of the more confusing lore and plot holes that I found when researching the Subnautica timeline. There will also be a breakdown and behind the scenes video where I explain all the Easter eggs and my experience with the game and researching it and making the timeline, but that won't come for a little bit because I like to wait for the comments to build up so I can answer some of the most frequently asked questions. Speaking of questions, in Subnautica lore there are a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of ambiguous timing with a lot of events. Most specifically is Sam's story in Below Zero, where we don't really know the exact timing of events, so it's kind of left up to interpretation. I did my best to put them in an order that made the most sense to me, but strictly speaking, there is no definitive right answer. So if you have your own interpretation of how the events unfolded or the timing of it, go ahead and tell me in the comments below. Other than that, check out the links that are on screen right now, and I'll see you 2 more times this summer with 2 additional timelines, the second being my biggest video yet, so stay tuned for that.